Marshall Chriswell is with us. It's time for another installment of Marshall Law. This radio program intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law is constantly changing, and the information may not be complete or correct depending on the date and your particular legal problem. Each problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of these differences, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. There's one of those on the line with me right now. He is Marshall Chriswell joining us this morning. And Marshall, I know that you just told me what you would like to talk about. I can't remember. It is consumer protection, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The Pennsylvania. What the statute is called is the Unfair Trade Practices and Consumer Protection Law.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole bunch of big words. What do they mean?
Yeah, and they go by. You often see them referred to as the very elegant acronym, the PAUTPCPL.
You betcha.
Yeah. So the statute, it's a law that's been on the books since the late 60s, and basically what it's designed to do is to protect consumers when they are Pennsylvania residents or other residents of other states doing business in Pennsylvania with Pennsylvania companies, when you purchase or receive services from a Pennsylvania company that is fraudulent, where there's an aspect of it being fraudulent, misleading, deceptive, and there are all sorts of specific scenarios that are covered under the Act. And it's been amended and expanded over the years, both by the legislature, who over time has added specific deceptive practices, such as the law specifically deals with telemarketing. It specifically has provisions to deal with pyramid schemes and chain letters. I don't know if we see those as much anymore as far as in the mail, but over time, and then also in addition to the changes made by the legislature over time, the courts, the Pennsylvania appellate courts, have expanded the protections, consistently expanded the protections over time, and so it's a very powerful protection for Pennsylvania consumers.
Well, would we also include a couple of very common phrases that we hear these days, bait and switch and lemon laws? Absolutely. So the law it prohibits essentially, when you're talking about bait and switch, if you're advertising a particular product or service and you describe it either verbally to the consumer, a salesperson gives a description of it, what this item can do, what its and what its qualities are, and whether it's new or used, and that it does or doesn't need any repairs, and if a court would find that those statements, whether they were verbal or written in an advertisement or a proposal, if those were deceptive, if you're advertising something to be one thing and it turns out to be something else, then that is a quintessential violation of the consumer protection law. Mm-hmm. And I would assume as well that contractor protections are involved here too.
Yes. So, and of course, we're just talking about consumer transactions. So, an individual, a family, purchasing an item or services for household use, but not for business purposes. So, this does not apply to business transactions, even if it's
a large business doing selling to a small mom and pop. It's still that's a commercial transaction, so that doesn't fall within the scope of the law. But absolutely, home improvement contractors who are contracting for repairs at someone's home or residential property. Yes, and there are specific provisions in the law with respect to contractors. And we've talked before. We have a specific law, the Home Improvement Contractors Act, that is a completely separate Pennsylvania law that governs home improvement contractors. But that statute, it sets forth lots of different requirements for contractors as far as if you're dealing with a homeowner, you have to have a written contract, and it has to contain dates of start and completion for the project. It has to state how the person's going to be billed. Has to provide them with notice that they can rescind the contract within 3 days of making it. All of those things are in the home improvement law, but what the home improvement law says is that any violation of that law is also considered to be a violation of the Unfair Trade Practices Act. So those two laws, if you're dealing with a home improvement contractor who has violated the home improvement law, you're always suing. If there's a problem, you're always suing under both acts.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple of moments ago pyramid schemes.
Yep.
And that is where probably the word scam jumps first to mind is when you talk about a pyramid scheme. They're awful hard for normal folks to figure out what we're talking about when we say pyramid scheme. So could you give us a brief overview of what that is?
Well, and I can let me tell you how the statute describes it here. So a scheme for the disposal or distribution of property. So where you're paying, someone is paying money, and their payment is supposed to generate all sorts of additional money by the fact that the money trickles down through this pyramid, but the people at the top of the pyramid are the ones that are getting a cut from everybody else that's paying. And this was, used to be done through the mail, but there are electronic versions of that scheme as well. And you're right; they can be very, very complex now, very sophisticated. The consumer protection law, it's interesting because, as a normal consumer, you might, one individual piece of one of these scams. If you're one victim of, a relatively small amount of money, that is benefiting this person at the top who's making thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars or more off of this scam. If you're the one little guy, you may not take significant legal action to defend your rights. What the consumer protection law allows in those types of situations, that the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office can, in addition to if bringing criminal charges, if that's warranted, they can sue businesses specifically under this law for deceptive practices, including those types of schemes, but all kinds of deceptive practices. The Attorney General's office can jump in, and there are very severe civil penalties that can be meted out, in addition to criminal penalties. So there's two enforcement mechanisms. If it's a big enough scam, the Attorney General's office gets involved, but any regular person can also sue under this law. And the reason that people do is the reason there are so many suits brought under this law is because even when I, as an individual, am suing a home improvement contractor or somebody that fraudulently sold me a bill of goods, I can obtain up to 3 times the amount of monetary damages that I suffered plus my attorney's fees. So that's where the teeth of the law is, and that's why a lot of those cases settle even before they'd get to court.
Yeah. I would assume that there are very technical differences between the terms fraud and deceptive practices that an attorney would be able to sort through with those with their clients. And I would assume as well that somebody has already suffered harm by the time that they go to an attorney, and that's when you have to spring into action, huh?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, there's been some case law on this statute in the past couple of years. You know, you used to almost have to prove fraud, and fraud's a high burden to prove fraud. You've got to prove that someone had the state of mind to willfully decept you, right? To deceive you. They knew that what they were saying was deceptive. They enticed you to make this purchase based on those statements, et cetera. Now, under the consumer protection law, it's what we call strict liability. If a business makes a false statement, and they don't even have to willfully make the false statement, if they put out an advertisement that has false or misleading statements in them, and you purchase the product and you're monetarily damaged by it, they're liable. Doesn't matter whether they did it willfully or not. So that it makes it a very strong consumer protection law. Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. Terrific. So somebody feels that they have been harmed. They want to talk to you about it. What should they do?
You'd give me a call at 724-465-5826. You can stop and see me in the old R&P Coal Building, which is at 655 Church Street in Indiana, or go online to www.westernpalawyer.com.
Marshall, thanks so much for the visit this morning. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Todd. Take care.
You too. It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. WCCSradio.com.